Hello, Randy Cryle here with my inflatable toilets for a better late than never review, sort of an armchair quarterback look at the super successful documentary, The Game Changers. The Game Changers has been one of the most hotly debated films about plant-based nutrition ever. The meat-eating, carny, keto crowd absolutely hates this film. It's been allegedly debunked, and the debunkers have been soundly debunked. I've seen this film a few times, absolutely love it. There are many things I would do different, so I'm just going to watch the movie again, talk about what I like, what I don't like, and maybe what I would do differently if I were a filmmaker. The last time I watched The Game Changers would have been as a motivational film before I went to run the Falls 100 in Kentucky. Very tough race. There were about 28 entrants into the 100 miler and only 8 of us finished. And I had heard from one of the race directors that the winner was vegan. The race was in an area where it would be pretty tough to find a vegan meal out in a restaurant. Anyhow, I've been on a 100% plant-based diet for well over 9 years now, and so I've done quite a bit of experimentation, years and years of reading, watching documentaries, videos based on peer-reviewed science, etc. Quite a bit of research and self-study. Of course, I grew up eating meat, dairy and eggs, and ever so slowly weaned myself off that stuff to regain my health. So yes, now I would say I'm very biased towards a plant-based diet, but it's based on a lot of studying. Just 5.5 minutes into the film, we find that James Wilkes establishes himself as a true badass ex-military guy, martial arts expert, and trainer of military, and more. From Bruce Lee, early in his life, he learned to, number one, research your own experience. 2, absorb what is useful. 3, reject what is useless. 4, add what is specifically your own. Much later in life, more recently, a very serious injury sidelined James. He ended up studying nutrition for over 1,000 hours and learned the healing power of plants from exclusive nutrition from plants. The first expert in the documentary is Dr. Fabian Kahns, a forensic pathologist. He's discussing the Roman gladiators, also known as the barleymen, or the hordeari. In other words, they ate beans and barley. The gladiators were primarily vegetarian, and Dr. Kahns gets into the science that proved it. So there was some interesting stuff there for me, a little bit, some new material, but what I think they missed here was an opportunity to tell the world that the bones of the Roman kings, the kings lived on the king's diet, which was rich in meat, dairy, and eggs. Those bones were full of osteoporosis. Next up, we learn about a fight coming up between Conor McGregor, who's a major meat eater, eating steak 3 times a day to train for the fight, versus Nate Diaz, who is a vegan fighter. Spoiler alert, in this case, the vegan absolutely kicks the carnivore's ass. And when Diaz crushed McGregor, it was considered the greatest upset in UFC history. So that's a lot of fun. And next he introduces Scott Jurek, who will be in and out of this documentary up until about the end. He is an ultra runner, considered one of the top ultra runners of all time. He's been a long-term vegan, and he, during this documentary, was trying to set a fastest known time running a supported race through the Appalachian Trail, which meant an average of over 11,000 feet of climb and the same number of feet of descent every single day. So nearly 2,200 miles running every single day. Now, I learned about Scott Jurek back in the best-selling book Born to Run back in about early 2010. So he was one of those key people who convinced me to then go onto a 100% plant-based diet. Next up, James introduces Dr. James Lewis, who is a former pro sports team physician. And he is telling us that our energy for athletics primarily comes from carbohydrates. Limiting carbohydrates is likely to impair glycogen levels, which will inhibit performance. The movie bounces around. Next up, he gets into a history of how false information from the 1800s led to the global population believing that they needed to eat meat, eggs, and dairy to be healthy, and that vegetarians would be deficient. However, there were exceptions along the way. Olympic gold medalists included Emil Voigt, Paavo Nurmi, Murray Rose, Edwin Moses, and Carl Lewis. So for many decades and generations, vegan athletes have been performing at the highest levels, proving the majority were wrong all along. And next up, he gets into current Olympians, with the first one being Morgan Mitchell, an Aussie 400-meter champion runner. Morgan Mitchell said that after going all plant-based in diet, her energy increased and there were no deficiencies, including her iron level. Morgan was the epitome of what a young female athlete should look like. And I think millions of young ladies will be inspired by her appearance in this film. Next up, an older female athlete is introduced, Dotsie Bausch, an 8-time U.S. national cycling champion. After going vegan, she describes herself as becoming like a machine. This extended her professional career into years where retirement would have been the norm. But on her new diet, she kept going stronger and faster. So what's no surprise to me is it doesn't matter the age of the athletes. Incredible improvements in performance are enabled by an all plant-based diet. At about 15 minutes into the documentary, a key part of the documentary is opened up about the protein discussion. So what we learn right away is that the animals that people eat get all of their protein from plants, ultimately. Animals as food make animals effectively the middleman. And humans who eat all plants get 70% more protein than they need. And even though athletes do need more protein, they still get more than enough from an all plant sourced diet. This is where the pro sports training physician emphasizes that all plant foods contain all of the essential amino acids in varying degrees. That's why it is so easy to get more protein than we need, all of the amino acids, from an exclusively plant-based diet. The film could have used this as an opportunity to point out that non-vegans, especially those who consume a heavy percentage of their calories from meat, eggs, and dairy, are fiber deficient. Morgan Mitchell understands that a race can come down to 1/1000th of a second. She needs every advantage possible, and that's where her vegan benefit was really obvious. So James wanted to know, after seeing lean vegan runners, what about the big guys? And first guy he features is Kendrick Ferris, a vegan U.S. Olympic weightlifter who broke records and won at the Pan Am Games. Also featured was Patrick Babounier, one of the world's strongest men, with several records. He's vegan, strong like an ox. Oxes are known herbivores. So he stopped eating meat in 2005 and added muscle bulk and strength since then. So one of the world's very strongest men is vegan, and the keto crowd does not like that. Also featured was boxing heavyweight title contender Bryant Jennings. He had been a junk food eater most of his life, but when he went vegan, he learned what was in food and realized that most people have no clue what's in their food. A very interesting part of this film got into what is actually in our food. And they featured a study where they took 3 young male athletes and fed them 3 burritos per day for 2 days. One of the guys was vegan, so his burrito was vegan both days. After the meals, they did a blood draw, and the other 2 athletes had a burrito with meat in it on day 1, and on day 2, they used imitation vegan meat in those burritos. So they were vegan burritos, and after the blood was drawn for both days, the athletes got to do a comparative. So Griff was the vegan athlete, and he had clear blood for both days, of course, because there was no animal fat floating on top, and the plasma was kind of a clear, healthy, golden look, because he was eating plant-based fat sources. Seeing the blood was a wake-up call for the other 2 athletes. When they looked at the blood from day 1, it was obvious that the plasma was sort of milky and cloudy looking, and there was greasy animal fat floating on top. And on day 2, the blood looked like Griff's blood. So the bottom line here was really simple. Just one single animal-based meal can impair blood flow, while plants have the opposite effect and can actually improve endothelial function. So if many people are eating meat, dairy, or eggs with every single meal, therefore their artery function is constantly impaired. So it's no wonder that coronary artery disease is the #1 killer of Americans. So next we're at the point where James is finally serious about adopting a plant-based diet. I've heard it ever since I started experimenting with plant-based diets. Vegans recover faster. Bonnie, the champion cyclist, says that her diet, her vegan diet, was the most powerful aspect of her training, and that it helped her speed up the recovery and repair cycle so that she could train harder and become even quicker as the oldest athlete to ever participate at the Olympic level in her age range. The next expert is Dr. Scott Stoll, who is a former Olympic athlete and doctor who is posing the question, which package of protein is better, animal sourced or plant sourced? With animal source, you get inflammatories. There's an inflammatory property to animal sourced food. There are toxins as well as heme iron. So there's a negative impact on the gut biome. And with plant sourced protein, you get antioxidants, phytochemicals, minerals, and vitamins. The plants, on average, have 64 times the antioxidant content. Therefore, the result is 29% less inflammation in just 3 weeks on an all plant-based diet. Next up, he got into injury recovery and featured a football player, pro football player, Derek Morgan, who noted that in his sport, the injury rate is about 100%. So he, on a vegan diet, found that he was less sore and less swollen. So upon having his blood tested after the diet change, his cholesterol went down, blood pressure went down, but most importantly, his inflammation markers were almost as low as they could go. Next up, Dr. Stoll is back to let us know that at every level, from the cells on up, eating plant-sourced foods speeds the healing process. 6 weeks in, James, the commentator for the film, 6 weeks into his all plant-based diet, he sets a record on the heavy rope swing workout. Magnitudes more stamina demonstrated just 6 weeks in. I recommend you watch this movie just to see how James helps his father, who's just over 60 years old, I believe, and he's had a heart attack with no prior symptoms. This is where Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn gets involved with the documentary, and I highly recommend you look him up. Find his website, read his books. He's phenomenal. Many more doctors are featured in this section of the film. They get into heme iron, which only comes from animal-sourced foods. 1 milligram per day of heme iron is associated with a 27% increase in the risk of CHD. That is coronary heart disease. And to put that into perspective, just 1 hamburger patty has well over 2 milligrams of heme iron. They start getting into the fact that animal proteins themselves are a problem. In fact, they sort of miss an opportunity, in my opinion, to make the point that the mere presence of animal cells in our gut, which do leak into our blood system, is an issue. And there is a huge link between that and common autoimmune diseases in the USA. There are countries where they don't eat like us, or there are populations of people who do not eat animal-sourced foods, and they suffer from far, far less autoimmune diseases. These doctors bring out the point that people who eat all plant-based reduce the risk of heart attack by 55%. Plant-based diets are the only diet shown to actually reverse coronary artery disease. Caldwell Esselstyn's son, Rip, is introduced next. He is a former firefighter turned triathlete turned author, and he is featured in a very inspirational segment where he put a large number of firefighters onto a 7-day all plant-based diet with great health results. Sadly, 67% of firefighter deaths in the line of duty are due to heart attacks. Another favorite section of the movie is when Lucius Smith is introduced. 60-year-old former NFL cornerback. He was Jamie's longtime strength and conditioning coach. Evidently, James did not realize that Lucius had been on an all plant-based diet for nearly 10 years at the time of filming. And the dude is a beast. He says his grandchildren cannot keep up with him. He is ripped, focused, and energetic. He says that 20-year-olds can't hang. They just can't begin to keep up with him at age 60. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is brought into the documentary now. I understand why they brought a big name celebrity bodybuilder into it. Kind of have mixed emotions about that. Recently, several months, I guess, after the movie came out, Arnold was in Parade magazine in our Sunday newspaper, kind of going on and on about, yeah, he's more plant-based, but he still loves his steaks, feeding his family steaks. Sure would have been nice to have maybe a little less Arnold in the movie and maybe feature some seniors who've been doing this for decades. I'm thinking of athletes Ruth Heydrich, now Dr. Ruth Heydrich in her 80s, who healed stage 4 breast cancer in her 40s by skipping chemo, skipping radiation, and after a surgical removal of a tumor, went on an all plant-based diet and has stayed that way for decades. There's also Mike Fremont in his 80s and 90s setting many age-specific world records. He also healed late-stage cancer with a plant-based diet and is doing really well. Next, we learn that a diet high in animal-sourced foods results in a 75% increase in premature death from all causes. And there is a 400 to 500% increase in death risk from most forms of cancer. We're learning here that there's not a different type of diet to prevent cancer versus diabetes versus heart disease. There's one diet that helps prevent and heal all of those health concerns. Next up, James is a bit confused by some conflicting information. He wants to know about the caveman and the paleo diet. So one of the doctors brought in on this was a Harvard anthropologist, Richard Wrangham. And there were other experts, but the latest evidence shows early humans ate mostly plants. We are adapted to consume plants. We have a long digestive tract, and carnivores have a short digestive tract. We do not make any of our own vitamin C, therefore we are completely dependent on plants for vitamin C. We also, and this was new to me, we have trichromatic vision, whereas true carnivores have monochromatic vision. So we see more colors, which would imply that helps us find fresh, ripe fruit and other foods. Our brains are highly dependent on glucose, starving for glucose. The most efficient way to get this is via carbohydrates. Now one maybe weakness of the movie was they didn't really talk much about whole carbohydrates. Whole plant-based foods, minimally processed, that aspect is super important. There are unhealthy vegans, and those people tend to eat a lot of junk foods. Highly processed plant-sourced foods are detrimental to our health as well. Next up, we get into taking a look at humans' teeth versus true carnivores' teeth. And a true carnivore has teeth that are good for cutting and tearing meat. Humans absolutely do not have the great evidence that we're primarily herbivores is right in our own mouths. For humans, animals are the wrong food source. Next, they get into B12. What about B12? Well, again, animals are again a middleman in terms of a source of B12. Traditionally, humans got their B12 from maybe some dirt that was still on their food, or drinking from streams, from eating food that wasn't so highly cleansed. So up to 39% of us, including meat eaters, are deficient in B12. So the best thing to do for insurance is to take a low-cost, low-risk B12 supplement. It's impossible to overdose on this, and vegan sources are obviously available. Next up, we get some extraordinarily inspirational updates from a couple of the athletes. The strongman flipped a car over single-handedly in front of a bunch of prison inmates. Basically at the same time, flipping the real men eat meat myth. Next up is the highly talked about section by Dr. Aaron Spitz from the American Urological Association. He wanted to do an experiment to show how the more animal foods men eat, the faster they lose their manly manhood. Obviously, completely opposite of the real men eat meat myth. So what Dr. Spitz did was rather creative. He attached measuring devices, high-tech tools, to 3 young male athletes' penises while they slept. This experiment was done for 2 nights to measure the effect of different types of food. On the first night, the young men ate an animal-sourced burrito, and on the second night, they had a meat substitute put in, so it was a vegan burrito. And each of the men were given their results. In the meat versus plant-based meals, the first athlete saw a 7.51% increase in the circumference of his erections on the plant-based food versus the meat-based meal the night prior, and a 303% increase in the number of minutes of erection time. Worth noting is that the other 2 athletes had even stronger results, even more evidence that the plant-based meal, just one plant-based meal, was far healthier for their sexual function than an animal source meal. Next up is hormones, and with an emphasis on testosterone. Nime Delgado, a natural professional bodybuilder, has never eaten meat. You wouldn't know it by seeing him. His T levels are incredibly healthy, and he's had incredible muscle growth. So they also get into soy. Phytoestrogen is a completely different thing from estrogen found in animal-based food sources. What they've found is that soy protein actually has the opposite effect. Meat, dairy, and eggs are likely to have real animal-sourced estrogen. Animal-sourced estrogen can increase a man's estrogen levels while decreasing testosterone significantly. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And by going on an all plant-based diet, cortisol can be lowered by 27% in not a lot of time. That's significant and good. A completely shredded and ripped natural pro bodybuilder appeared in the best shape of his life, vegan. His name, Misha Janiak. Next, they did get into the whole carbs, unprocessed carbs versus highly processed carbs a little bit. They noted that highly processed carbs increase body fat, while whole unprocessed carbs decrease body fat. And in an 8-week trial comparing a low-carb ketogenic diet to a normal carb diet, there was a slight loss of muscle in the keto group, while there was a gain of muscle mass of 2.9 pounds in the normal carb consuming group. Next up is another favorite section of the Game Changers, featuring a pro chef, Charity Morgan, the wife of Eric, a professional Titans football player from Tennessee. For Eric, the plant-based diet was about the love of delicious food and becoming a better teammate and player. So watching the post-game vegan team feast, it was fun to watch, and it kind of made me hungry. And since the Game Changers was released in about August, it was nice to see the Titans make the playoffs again this year. Next up, Jamie is at 6 months into his all plant-based nutrition experiment, and his strength, endurance, and recovery are better than ever. His father's health is on the mend, and his wife and children are on board with the plant-based diet. As he learns how effective and efficient this diet is, there's some anger bubbling up relative to how and why there are so many lies out there to support the animal agriculture business. And then we get into the classic tobacco business analogy, how effectively animal agriculture, the big food companies, are basically following tobacco's playbook. Many of the food companies, the pharma companies, and the media are making a killing, lots of money, off the nonstop propaganda, bought and paid for research from the meat, egg, and dairy industries, designed to create a lot of intentional confusion. But every time, with all people all around the world, the best results come from a predominantly plant-based nutrition plan. Next up is Damian Mander with the Anti-Poaching Foundation. His anti-poaching work, protecting animals that are threatened by extinction, it became clear to Damian that needing to eat meat for protein was complete bullshit. Very well said, Damian. The big threat is not just poachers to these distressed animal species, but the cultivation of livestock. Animal agriculture is taking over so much of the wild land and reducing biodiversity. So basically, 83% of farmland is used to produce meat, eggs, and dairy, while only providing 18% of the world's calories. What could be more inefficient? So seeing the environmental impact is awful. I'm just going to touch the surface here. 27% of the world's fresh water goes towards animal agriculture, and those same businesses do an absolutely massive amount of pollution damage to land, water, and air. About 70 billion animals each year are slaughtered for human consumption. Getting near the end of the documentary, James's father is actually 71 near the end of the filming, not closer to 60 as I had thought. But he has become a happy and healthy vegan, and he found out that he had an 85% chance of having another heart attack before he changed his diet. Then we had more athletes featured, including Lewis Hamilton, a 5-time Formula One racing champion. And then we got back to the Tennessee Titans, who ended up having their best season in 15 years. Their chef said it was the burritos. And they ended up with 14 players on the plant-based diet. We got to see a really cool and emotional finish to Scott Jurick's setting of a new speed record on the Appalachian Trail. With some serious injury, he still beat the record by 3 hours, which is pretty close. The movie ended with the super strong man Patrick asking, "What are you going to do with the power you have?" So all in all, Game Changers was a phenomenally effective documentary. If you haven't seen it, get it and watch it. Watch it more than once and share it with your friends. I guess there's not really a whole lot I do different. I would have featured more of the long-term doctors who are that have been following plant-based nutrition for a longer period of time. Dr. John McDougall should have probably played a role. Neil Barnard, PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, probably should have been in there. I think I would have featured even more athletes, more seniors, and maybe a little bit less on how did we get into this mess. Thank you for watching. Hit the like button, share the videos. Happy trails!